Do you think what's happened in Switzerland will make others think, well, maybe we should have a referendum locally if someone wants to build a huge cathedral or a huge mosque? Or, I mean, the Dutch are starting to, as we saw in the video introduction, the Dutch are getting a bit frisky about all this. Is it going to become a problem in Britain, do you think?
Well, I think it could be. I don't think it is at the moment. I think, I mean, I'm not entirely sure that I agree with Afua that we have a sort of inchoate sense of British identity. I think we do have, and one of our very basic values has always been the fact that we were a nation which opened its arms to other people. I mean, you know, end of the Second World War, we said to all the countries as we divested ourselves of our empire, we said, you know, you have citizenship. You can come and you can live in our country.
And say in education, your particular experience. I mean, my generation of school children, on the whole, there were boys and girls schools. So this co-education is a fairly recent and timescale phenomena, and yet a lot of the press go on about how Muslim families, on the whole, want their daughters to be educated exclusively in all-girls schools, as if this is some sort of horrible aspect of Islam, forgetting that until 20 years ago in Britain, and in fact for my own family, we chose our daughter to be educated in an all-girls school because that's what we wanted. So how does it all of a sudden become sinister, do you think, when it's
I think we should skip over the subject of faith schools, because I do think that they're a whole issue in themselves, which has not helped Islamophobia.
No.
I mean, you know, once you separate out all the Muslim girls and put them in a separate school, there is a real sense that they are different and we're different, and you accelerate the sense of separateness, which I think is a disaster. But just returning to, I mean, I have been an immigrant. My husband and I emigrated and lived in the United States for many years, and I have experienced anti-immigrant emotions there. And it's very interesting because America, after all, is the nation above all else, which is the melting pot. Sure. I mean, you know, everybody in America was an immigrant.
You wouldn't conform and wear horrid T-shirts and things like that.
You know, and I think, I mean, there is a real question to be asked: why is it that countries like Britain and like America, that have prided themselves on being melting pots in different ways, have suddenly have picked on this one group as something separate? And I do repeat again that I think that some of our Muslim community need to look into their own hearts as to whether they have reached out firmly enough and lovingly enough to say, you know, this is a great country we're living in. We are taking the benefits of education for our children, of the National Health Service, of all the rest of it. You know, we should return something. But
should they compromise their own standards, which I would argue isn't just a Muslim concept? I mean, my wife is very, very strict Roman Catholic, and she doesn't like the way general society performs any more than a fairly strict Muslim would like the way general society...
She doesn't throw bombs at people about it.
No, and of course 99.9% of Muslims don't throw bombs.
Exactly.
It's a question of it's this issue of how do you conform to a society, but do you really approve of it? And not every white Anglo-Saxon living in Britain likes the way Britain's progressing, really, with the social problems that we've got.
The years that we brought our children up in America, we were very clear that we wanted our children to know they were British and to maintain British values, but we kept those within the home.
Yes,
I mean,
as
far as our children were concerned, when they went off to school, they went fully integrated with Americans, and they grew up for many years thinking of themselves.
Because in America, all the school children have to pledge allegiance. It doesn't matter where they come from. I mean, my nephew was doing this every morning at school, despite the fact he was British and coming back to Britain.
Well, I mean, I think that just shows that the sense of patriotism in a country like America is different from here. We do have a different relationship with the state. I feel like we're actually at a crossroads in this country. I feel like there is this conversation happening about our identity, about the future. Should we have a Bill of Rights? Should we have a written constitution? What are our values? And I think that this is a point that does come out in the book. It's important to separate those questions about immigrant communities, what we expect of them, and the things Pauline's saying about how you should behave and how much you should reflect the values of the society you're living in and make an effort. That is one, I think it is a very important question, but I think it's very worrying that has become linked to the question of terrorism and the threat to security, because most Muslim immigrants, regardless of how much their lifestyles are in accordance with what's perceived as traditional, it doesn't make them a threat to security. And I think
the intelligence services get a lot of their information from the community themselves. It's not as if they're close. I mean, I don't know whether you found it with your distinguished record in universities, whether the level of scrutiny that's going on now is slightly worrying, where Muslim students particularly are there's a focus on them and monitoring what they do.
I find that wholly distasteful, Derek.
Yeah.
I mean, I find all prejudice distasteful. I mean, the thing is that prejudice, whatever it is, whether it's, whichever side it comes from and whatever form it takes, it is ugly and it leads to very ugly behaviour. And all I say is that it's a two-way street, that there should not be prejudice either way.
Either way. Are you an optimist, Afua?
I am an
as a
optimist.
journalist, you cover it in more detail than most. I'd be probably quite depressed if I did your job every day.
Well, I think the thing that I find quite heartening is, you're always looking at these extreme situations. You're looking at the extremes of politics. You're looking at the BNP, and then you're looking at how much extremist ideology is being absorbed by mainstream parties, and that's something I do worry about, because things that would have been regarded as quite unacceptable 10 years ago are now you're now hearing them from the government and from the opposition, and Gordon Brown famously kind of hijacked Nick Griffin's slogan about British jobs for British workers.
So this is the mainstream. It's happening in Europe, of course, as well. Mainstream parties moving more towards these issues, a right-wing stand, if you like, to try and keep the extreme right at bay. But is that working? I don't know.
Well, I think the fact that they think it will get them votes is a worrying phenomenon itself. But the thing that gives me cause for optimism is that the more I look at these quite depressing developments, the more I discover that the kind of decency of ordinary people, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it really does live on. And this was something that came out recently with the debate about the BNP. Should the BNP allowed to express their views on Question Time? Regardless of what you think about that, what emerged very clearly was that if you allow people to hear Nick Griffin in the raw, they react quite strongly.
They don't like it, that's right.
People, people are sensible, and if they hear something that is unreasonable and bigoted and prejudiced, then they oppose it. And
maybe that's because 99% of human beings are actually decent people. So you always the extremes don't matter what colour.
99% of Muslims, 99% of Christians, 99% of humanists. Most people like to get on with their lives and get on with their neighbours and live normally. But I partly blame Tony Blair's anxiety to convince the British people that the Iraq War was really necessary and so on, because I do think he helped to whip up some of that sort of anti-Muslim fear. A sort of Islamophobia, by building huge barricades and sending tanks out to Heathrow in case somebody came through. I think it was built up in a way, and I think Bush did similar things in America. If instead they'd said from the very start, well, we've been deeply wounded. 9/11 was a terrible event, and the people who did it were evil. But let's all pull together and let's recognise that there are good people who are from that same.
That's a positive note to end on, because I'm afraid, that's all we've got time for. So let me thank our guests, Afua Hirsch and Lady Perry, for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have a book you would like the programme to review, please email me at epilogue@presstv.co.uk. Thanks for watching.